This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HORN HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you today on May 12th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. So first, my usual boring housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And from there, you can scroll down the page. Well, actually, at the top of the page is the most recent recording of the show. So you can listen live at the time that it's live, or you can search the archive listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And separately, I'd be thrilled if you'd follow me on my Facebook page. I also have started posting. Yes, I'm an older person who's finally started posting on Instagram. So if you want to look there, but on Facebook, it's Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. And on Instagram, it's Karmic Evolution. So, feel free to follow me there. Facebook doesn't care about likes anymore. They care about follows. So following me on both of those pages would be cool, or one or the other. And yes, I'm still offering my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners only for $99. And this reading is for those of you who are interested in astrology, want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart, and how it can direct you to learn more about your soul's true purpose. And that's because a birth chart is essentially a snapshot, or a blueprint, if you will, because it shows us the exact position of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth. And that can reveal a great deal about you. So when we look at a chart from the vantage point of soul growth, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, even a shorter one, can be tremendously helpful for learning, as I said, your soul's true purpose in this lifetime and how to best move towards your highest destiny in this incarnation. It can identify patterns of behavior that may have originated both early in life and or during past lives that affect your current relationships, your career choices, your jobs, your finances, and or your health now, but that a reading can help you better understand no longer serve your soul's karmic journey moving forward. And that's because it can provide insights into what may have tripped your soul up in the past, because learning that can help you entertain new perspectives and gain greater awareness through this kind of astrological insight to change your behavior proactively and consciously so that you can garner greater happiness and more satisfaction in this lifetime. So all of this is easy, believe it or not, when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. If you're interested, simply email me at SHERI, and that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading scheduled as soon as possible. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so busy week. Let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. As I spoke about last week and before, Mercury began his retrograde period this week on May 10th, which is going to last through June 3rd, and which calls us to all things re. This is something that most people who are interested in astrology already know, right? This is a period to review, to rethink, to re-edit, to reanalyze, to redo, to replan, to revise. In short, it's more time for introspection than for action. And I want to go a little bit deeper into Mercury retrograde periods, which I often want to do because it's just a subject that fascinates me, really. And I think it's one that the general population often gets scared into misunderstanding and misinterpreting. So Mercury retrograde periods, and yes, these happen 3 to 4 times annually, actually serve a higher purpose than simply to instill fear in our hearts about miscommunication, lost cell phones, messed up electronics, and missed fine print or overlooked fine print resulting in bad purchases. And that's like, never mind the potential return of a past friend or lover to our lives, one that we might be thrilled about or one that we're like, oh my God. Do I need a restraining order again, or whatever. So anyway, these are the types of things that can happen during Mercury retrograde periods. But the truth is that Mercury, who of course was known as Hermes, the psychopomp in Greek mythology, was the only god able to traverse between the underworld and Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. So since the advent of depth psychology and the deeper study of archetypes, particularly by people like Carl Jung and James Hillman and others, the underworld, Joseph Campbell, the underworld has become a metaphor for the unconscious realm of our psyches, and Mount Olympus a metaphor for our higher spiritual sensibility. So in an astrological context, Pluto, which rules Scorpio, represents our underworld, or that about which we remain unconscious, while Jupiter connotes our ability to reach a higher, more spiritual level of consciousness, which brings us closer to the realm of the gods. And in between lies earthy Saturn, the domain of our egos. Well, hang on, let me just go back a second, because what I want to say is that Saturn and Jupiter in traditional astrology, well, in modern astrology actually, because traditional astrology is before we discovered the outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because they could not be seen by eye by the ancients. Jupiter and Saturn are known as bridge planets. So they connect the personal planets, the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, to the outer realm of the outer planets, which are known to be, at least on a psychological level, more connected to the collective and to this underworld of our unconscious, right? So again, Jupiter, because it's Saturn and then Jupiter, it's Jupiter and then Saturn, they connect us, but Saturn is kind of known as the ring past naught, which is, that was the finite end of the universe because we couldn't see past it. So while Jupiter again connotes our ability to reach a higher, more spiritual level of consciousness because it's the planet of expansion and because it's the planet of higher knowledge, in between lies earthy Saturn. And Saturn represents the domain of our ego's logical, rational orientation toward fact and data assimilation. So Saturn sits on Earth, and judges what's true and what's false. But he does so only based on empirical data. And Saturn is, of course, associated with tradition. So it has a lot to do in our own personal psyches. And I've said this over and over again, but so forgive the repetition, but that's based on what we were told, what we were taught, and what we might have been forced to believe by others without questioning it. So Saturn and his ruled sign Capricorn, they don't deal much with the higher realm because they don't believe it's something tangible upon which can be built a successful foundation here on Earth. I mean, Saturnian people tend to say things like, well, I don't know, how do I know there's a heaven? You prove it, right? And then you tell them stories or you give them a book about people who have had near-death experiences and what they've seen and all that. And they just go, yeah, right, whatever. So they're kind of a, Saturn's kind of a naysaying archetype. Because he's like, no, you see, this is here. See this? I can see it. Can you feel it? Can you touch it? Can you smell it? It's right here. And if you can't, Saturn's like, it doesn't exist. So the worst thing one can say about Saturn in this context is that while his archetypal energy is often great for developing a reputation for building concrete things, such as businesses, homes, and a solid, well-respected reputation, all of which provide people security here in their lives on Earth, he's really not so hot at stretching his imagination toward things he cannot see, feel, taste, hear, or smell, like I said. So the metaphor of Mercury as psychopomp during the messenger god's retrograde periods becomes useful when it helps us understand that this is a time when we're temporarily suspending our ego's empirically oriented left brain, read Saturn's more earthbound, limited ego consciousness, in order to bring, or I should say boundaried ego consciousness, in order to bring our more intuitive, visual, right brain's capabilities, read the subconscious, which stores our soul's knowledge of the ages, our wisdom for the ages, to the forefront then. And what so many don't get is that it's often the subconscious or unconscious portion, and I use these two terms, I use them, what's the word? Symbiotically, meaning, to me, they mean the same thing, subconscious, unconscious. And it's often that portion of our psyches that runs our daily show. So Saturn's like completely unaware of this, right? Saturn's going, oh, I'm going to pick a flower. I'm going to plant a flower. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to build a house. I'm going to buy a property, whatever. Tangible, physical, concrete things. So people don't get, and I find it's kind of amusing actually, because Mercury in and of itself, which rules Gemini and Virgo, but mostly in its Gemini connotation where it's retrograding now, can have a reputation of being kind of superficial. He likes to collect information, pass information, broadcast information, but he's not really interested in fact checking. He's not interested in verifying. He doesn't use Snopes, or whichever site now is the one that's more, valuable. I don't know, people, they get mad sometimes when you tell them to go to Snopes because now they say that Snopes doesn't, work or whatever. But regardless, as my friend who taught sixth grade or sixth graders used to say, if you Google something, make sure it says .edu at the end, okay? Because then you'll know it's coming from research from a university or from the educational realm. So again, what people don't get, especially during these Mercury retrograde periods, is that often it's the unconscious portion of our psyches that's running our daily show. And that's because that's where our soul stores its many lifetimes of emotional conditioning. There's a soul memory, right? That doesn't make it up into the conscious portion of our brains. And it's this conditioning that can lead to both confusion, and or wisdom, depending. So if one's soul is conditioned to act or react based on past experiences through specific and repetitive behavior patterns, which are developed from early this lifetime and or past lives, as I said, now is the opportunity during these Mercury retrograde periods for us to become more conscious of the origin of such habitually patterned behaviors. And likewise, Mercury, the psychopomp, can bring forth from our psyche's soul portion the part of us about which we're often most unconscious, the wisdom of the ages embedded or encoded there within us all. And in this way, we begin or we continue to better understand the difference between the way we use logic to interpret factual information intellectually versus processing information intuitively instead. And that's one reason, or one major reason, why the miscommunication and lack of clarity can plague us during Mercury retrograde periods, because and that's what gives these periods such a bad rep. So when you look on the internet, or you're reading you're signed up for an email newsletter by an astrologer, it's all about don't do this and don't do that and watch out for this and oh my god and yada yada. And yeah, that's true. It's true that miscommunication becomes more rampant when Mercury retrogrades, especially through an air sign, and particularly through mutable, less focused Gemini right now. So during this particular Mercury retrograde, which started May 10th at 4 degrees and 51 minutes of mutable Aries social Gemini, we'll continue reviewing the quality of our relationships. Air signs are about relating, communication, and how we relate to each other. And that's the same review we've been conducting since early 2021. It's a little over a year now. However, since Mercury's retrograde periods began morphing from purely the air element back into the earth element in early 2022, or this year, during its first retrograde period this year, our internal review has begun to shift toward reviewing whether the tangible resources in our lives afford us true inner security or not. Now, those who listened to last week's show might remember me having said this already, so forgive me for being redundant, but I'm reiterating this to make a larger point. So Mercury will regress from Gemini back into Taurus on May 22nd, station direct then at 26 degrees and 9 minutes of Taurus, and remain in Taurus until he re-enters Gemini on June 13th. He then stays in curious, loquacious, flighty, sometimes superficially gossipy Gemini until he moves into more sensitive, nurturing Cancer on July 4th. So why am I reiterating all this? Well, Mercury's slow shift back from air to earth during the remainder of 2022 helps us connect the true importance of our human relationships to our tangible resources. It will soon enough become less about how we relate to or with others than about reassessing our level of personal security based on our most important resources. And Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, represents the physical body. So this includes our physical bodies as we go through this year, and Mercury retrogrades begin to segue back from air to earth for the rest of this entire year. Now, we might ask ourselves the following questions because we're reviewing. So during Mercury retrograde, it's never a bad idea to meditate or journal or, take walks in nature or to do anything that puts us in better touch with our own psyches, right? Our unconscious. We might ask ourselves now, do my current relationships truly make me feel secure? And in doing that, we can divine what security is to each of us, right? We can ask, do I value my own physical body, which is Taurus, as much as those of others? And what can I do to secure my basic tangible resources? And by these, I mean food, shelter, clothing, etc., to better reflect my changed values over time. Meanwhile, as Mercury retrogrades through Gemini first, as I noted, we'll want to pay attention to any sleight of hand sales tactics that might entice us to buy into an idea or concept without any proof. It's wise to try not to get caught up in the Mercury's shell game and stereotypical retrograde scaremongering hype, and to remember instead to cut ourselves a break, since our psyches are actually extremely busy during these periods. So it's sort of like saying, I'm a little distracted. I forgot to put the tickets in my bag so that we could get on the plane. But what I'm saying is, remember, there's a higher purpose for that distraction now, and that not everything that happens is negative, because after all, we're again conducting the hard work of transferring soul level wisdom into consciousness, while at the same time transforming empirically learned knowledge into soul wisdom now. And therefore, it pays attention to remember that, if we miss an important phone call, an email, a text, forget to check the contract small print, or find someone contacting us out of the blue from the past, for better or worse, that it's not what happens to us, or it's not what happens to us that counts, as much as how we handle it or what we do about it. And that's because we have free will to choose whether we understand this consciously or not. It's now we may better understand that how we handle any Mercury retrograde mishaps may well continue to be driven by our unconscious habitual behavioral patterns. But it's also now that we have the ability to bring forth innate wisdom from the less conscious realm of our soul to better guide us toward a different behavioral expression that can ultimately lead us to a happier, more securely successful future. So let's change tracks for a second, because now many of us may know that Jupiter moved into Aries on May 10th. And it appears clear, even at this early date in this transit through this sign, this planet's transit through the sign, that it's applying its expansive nature to the topic of freedom. So since the shocking leak of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's draft decision on the Mississippi abortion case, the Mississippi abortion case was one that seeks to limit the legality of abortion to 14 weeks. And that leak happened as we were approaching the Sun-Uranus conjunction in Taurus on May 5th, that even before May 10th, forces had already begun to mobilize. Now, Jupiter is the planet of philosophy, higher education, law, and openness to foreign people, foreign cultures, foreign concept, and different ideas. And he's the king of the gods. Now, Jupiter loves a cause. And in Aries, Jupiter, Jupiter is also, in my mind, like I say, I like to bottom line things, right? Bottom line, Jupiter is the planet of expansion. Expansion of what? Expansion of consciousness. Anything and everything that happens to us that's Jupiter related doesn't necessarily give us what we want. It gives us what we need. So, when you hear interpretations of Jupiter, it's the great benefic. He's going to bring blessings. Yeah, that could be true. But it's going to depend on your individual natal chart and whether Jupiter is aspected fortuitously, aspected negatively, and how it's played out thus far in your life in terms of an archetypal energy. So in Aries, in particular, Jupiter mobilizes his troops to fight for a cause. And when Jupiter, and in Aries is like, I'm going. You can stay here. You can fall in beside me. I don't really care, but I'm going. So he's about freedom of movement. Now, when Jupiter reached the last degrees of empathic, collective-oriented Pisces between early May and its May 10th ingress into Aries, it's clear that his entrance into the Aryan instinctive proactive archetypal sign, now has placed expanded emphasis on growing an army to actually fight for what it believes to be a higher cause. So, what is that cause? Well, keep in the back of your mind the archetypal connection to the King of Gods who lives on Mount Olympus. And Jupiter is the king of gods, known as Zeus in Greek mythology, which was, the one that talked about Mount Olympus, which is the spiritual realm of higher consciousness. And that since Uranus, which represents making progress on behalf of humanity, entered Taurus in 2018, freedom and autonomy, Uranus, over our physical bodies, Taurus, has become a rallying cry. And that's especially true since COVID hit us hard here in the US and around the globe, but particularly here in early 2020. And mask mandates, vaccines, school closures, nursing home restrictions, etc., all became front page news. And let's not forget as well the Saturn-Uranus fixed square that hovered in and out of exact orb during 2021 and which will be returning again between September and November of 2022. Now, this clearly set up a clash between Saturnian traditional patriarchal the Saturnian traditional patriarchy, right? And progress on behalf of the divine feminine, although we might not have seen it that way at the time. So the irony here is that the universe doesn't favor one side over another. Rather, it merely advocates for higher consciousness so we can learn our soul's greater purpose and live peacefully with ourselves. And when we can live peacefully with ourselves, we can then manifest peace with others. Now, Jupiter, which represents higher law, in this particular, instance, what's going on is that, and I think a lot of this had to do with the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction a month ago, back on April 12th, right? Neptune dissolves what it touches. And if Jupiter's the higher law, Neptune's been dissolving that. Well, how has it been dissolving it? It's been dissolving the higher law, which is Mother Earth's divine feminine law of the natural cycles of life, espoused by Venus's Taurus, which is our current North Node energy, through the imposition of man-made laws. So what's happened over the last 2 years is it's kind of like, people are out in the streets objecting to having to wear masks and getting a vaccine with the cry of my body, my choice, neglecting their civic duty to protect the rest of humanity in the natural world. And here we enter the realm of climate change, which is a much bigger and much more foreboding threat to us than anything else on the ground right now. But that it's reaching a climax over the abortion rights issue here in the US. So as Jupiter moves further into Aries, and until he retrogrades back into Pisces from October 27th through December 20th, and that's just before Mercury retrogrades finally fully in the Earth element in Capricorn, which starts December 29th, it seems that Mother Nature is demanding pushback against the hubris of man-made laws in defense of her natural laws around bodily autonomy. Now, Jungian astrologer Liz Green writes in her book, The Astrology of Fate, which I recommend to anyone who's into psychological astrology or Liz Green, because it's an amazing book. She writes that there's a higher law than one man-made, be it born of religion or other sources. Now, Jupiter has a connotation with religion. So religiously made laws, some of which, of course, were thought to be handed down from the higher realm itself or from God himself, supersedes, natural law. Okay, so whether that man-made law, well, what I said, there's a higher law than one man-made, be it born of religion or other sources, and that's the immutable, indisputable law of nature. And what often taxes, vexes, or otherwise challenges this law of nature throughout history anyway, is mankind's hubris. Hubris to superimpose their own law over Mother Nature's law. Now, hubris, according to Green, suggests, and here I quote, arrogance, vitality, nobility, heroic striving, lack of humility before the gods, and the inevitability of a tragic end. End quote. Hubris, known since the earliest form of Greek drama, the earliest form of drama was Greek tragedy. It's been known since then as the hero's tragic flaw. And here I quote from The Astrology of Fate and Liz Green again. Where there is vigor, there is a tendency to overstep just bounds. Hence arises strife. And she continues, some kind of impersonal, super Olympian law punishes hubris and restores the eternal order which the aggressor sought to violate. End quote. So, though we've already seen this overstepping, we might take heart from Green's words. Jupiter in Aries for most of this next year will doubtless drive many toward both ends of this extreme, hubris and the punishment of hubris. In the end, however, it's Mother Nature herself who will have the last word. The rest of us simply have to play our parts in this all the world's a stage life while making clear whether we're defenders of the natural order or of a hubristically fashioned man-made one. And as always, the choice is up to each of us. Now, let's talk about the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, which occurs at 25 degrees and 18 minutes of the sign of evolutionary change on May 15th at 9:14 p.m. Pacific and May 16th at 12:14 a.m. Eastern Time. And this lunation's goal is to remind the Taurus Sun that hatred, jealousy, greed, and power over others, in fact, the whole assortment of horribles from Pandora's box, do in fact exist, and there's no wishing them away or ignoring them over a nice cup of hot chocolate and a bonbon. In fact, it's the Scorpio archetype that mythologically, metaphorically initiates the maiden into the phases of becoming a wife and mother. Now, the archetype's point here is not to demand that every female follow this pattern. Rather, its message is that change is part of the natural cycles of life, whatever that change may be. And as such, Scorpio tells Taurus that change is good. And not only that, but change is necessary because, as I've said many times before, it's the only constant. And that message is reiterated through Uranus and Taurus right now. However, Scorpio adds a little zinger to that because he cautions Taurus that whatever doesn't change, and by change, the god of the underworld means adaptation and again, evolution, because if we don't adapt, we won't evolve, and we will then most likely petrify, fossilize, and die eventually. So it's hard to enjoy that bonbon if you're dead, right? Therefore, Scorpio energy really represents the principle of adaptation as a means of effecting the kind of adjustment to evolutionary change necessary until it's time for natural death of the physical body to occur. And it's this adaptation that Taurus may most vociferously resist, even though that's often only because he's too comfortable with life's, pleasantries, comforts, things that feel good. Taurus, again, is a sign of the physical body and the physical body's senses, the things that Saturn used to corroborate its own world and to deny that there's any other realms out there. Venus is Taurus more intuitively says, oh, that smells good. I like that. Oh my God, that tastes good. I want more, right? Oh, that bed's so comfortable. Let me sleep in it. I don't think there's anyone who can't relate to that, right? But what exactly needs to change so that we may adapt to present circumstances the way they are now and not simply the way that we perceive them or want them to be? In other words, if we dismiss the need to change as only temporary or unimportant, all right, I'll get up now. I guess I'll fight a little, but then I got to go back to bed. We miss Scorpio's larger message that our future collective survival actually depends on change now. So, thus, if we look at the larger relevance of this current set of eclipses, and the upcoming one on May 15th or 16th, again, depending on your time zone, we can see that we were asked to plant new seeds representing what's of most value to us back at the Taurus new moon solar eclipse, April 30th, and will be asked at this Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse to release any old values we insist on stubbornly clinging to now. Now, aside from domestic policy, we also see this clearly in things like Vladimir Putin's insistence on returning the old Soviet Union territories back under the auspices of Mother Russia as he continues his barbaric and bloody invasion of the independent sovereign nation of Ukraine. I'm using that again as a metaphorical example. It's an invasion of a sovereign body, right? That has the right to make its own decisions, whether it's a nation or an actual physical body, makes no difference. And we also see right now, as we're heading towards this Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, a shortage well, I thought this was interesting. I'm just kind of tossing this in, right? It's just current events. There's a shortage. So between these eclipses, has been dealing with this abortion issue, which is rallying with Jupiter and Aries and mobilizing women who are going to come out in force. We're waiting for the opinion to come down in its finality, which seems the pundits are saying end June, early July. So there's still a lot of time between now and then that, as we're heading towards the next lunar eclipse, we're experiencing, at least locally in my area, a shortage of baby formula. So there's some kind of supply chain issue with that. But combined with the issue of women fighting for their sovereign bodily rights given to them by Mother Nature to have complete autonomy over their own bodies, here's a symbol from Mother Nature that, to me, serves as a warning. She's saying, if you starve women of their natural God-given rights, I'm going to show you what that looks like on another level, because doing so will lead to the starvation of unloved and unwanted babies down the line. Now, yes, admittedly, that's a subjective interpretation, but I'm not going to make any apologies for it because this issue is a bit too important for that. I mean, feel free to make your own or draw your own conclusions, right? But isn't it interesting that as the patriarchy, basically, right, is trying to deny women their rights to decide to what they want or need to do with their own bodies, that simultaneously there's a supply chain issue that involves feeding babies. It's just too weird not to notice it. That's all. Anyway, now Pluto rules Scorpio, which most of us know, and Pluto's a collective planet. So at this Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, the Scorpio moon is advising the Taurus sun that it's wise to heed the call for both reform and then to use that call to transform our world through the kinds of evolutionary changes that we can make because the natural world demands them. I mean, offhand dismissal of such a topic in essence denies the powerful role humanity may play in proactively ensuring the survival of Mother Earth, along with her ability to provide us all the abundant resources necessary for our individual physical survival. Now, in her book, The Astrology of Fate, Liz Green also speaks about the natural cycles leading to a kind of natural law, the denial of which usually comes around at some point to bite us in the butt. And we see this, for example, in the call to listen to Mother Earth's cry for greater attention to issues like climate change. Refusal to address our arrogant, unwavering, read stubborn belief in Earth's infinite resources illustrates our reluctance to recognize our own power to help prevent such losses from happening. I mean, denial ain't just a river in Egypt, as they say, and such negative fallout from the world's refusal to recognize the importance of devastating climate change to many places around the world and the people living in them can only be ignored for so long. Now, let's look for a moment at something, because I want to, slightly change tacks, but that astrologer Ronnie Dreyer, who I've had on the show before, talks about in her lectures on eclipses. And she believes that the duration of the period of an eclipse's importance is based on when the degree of the eclipse is hit by the transiting karmic nodes. So eclipses always happen within proximity of the nodes, meaning if there's a Scorpio South Node, Taurus North Node transit right now, that the eclipse will fall in or very close to those degrees. Now, on April 30th at the Taurus new moon solar eclipse, and remember, these tend to manifest on the solar level or the external level where we can all see them. The eclipse fell at 10 degrees and 28 minutes of Taurus, but the transiting nodes at that time were at 2228 of the Taurus North Node, Scorpio South Node. So Ronnie's theory is that if the transiting nodes have not yet hit the degree of the eclipse at the time of the eclipse, then the energies of that eclipse will be in play until the nodes reach that eclipse degree. And I've noted previously as well that according to astrologer Bill Meridian, who's got a book on the subject of eclipses, he's observed that the themes of an eclipse seem to emerge starting about 3 weeks prior to the actual eclipse. So if we follow this logic and know that a pair of eclipses falls within a particular Saros series and are therefore linked theme-wise, we can see that the Taurus new moon solar eclipse, which again asked us to weed our garden to make room to plant anew more meaningful values in accordance with moving toward the Taurus North Node's reverence for nature and the natural cycles of life, death, and rebirth, we see that the transiting nodes won't reach this eclipse degree until around January 10th of 2023. We also know, well, that means also that the effects of the eclipse started at the eclipse on April 30th, and which is a day or two before the Supreme Court leak, right? And the Sun conjoining Uranus, and then it will again be in effect. This themes will be in effect until early January. So we also know that the current Saturn square to the transiting nodes, which is echoed by the fact that the Sun and the Moon both, Taurus Sun, Scorpio Moon, are squaring Saturn at this upcoming Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, echoes also this Saros series theme, which is described by Bernadette Brady, and again, I'm being redundant, in her predictive astrology book as one revolving around a father or authority figure who's ailing or ill. Now, at this point, to me, it feels like a kind of something's rotten in the state of Denmark energy as Hamlet grapples with avenging the death of his father. Now, that may sound like from out of left field, but I'll leave you to ponder it. Anyway, this also means that, well, I want to mention here that this eclipse, this particular eclipse, given that particular theme, okay, that this eclipse falls very close to Joe Biden, President Joe Biden's Venus at 2833 Scorpio in his 12th house, and his 2733 Sun in Scorpio in the 12th house, which both square his 2942 node. So either way, that eclipse is potentially triggering that. There's disagreement amongst astrologers how close the orb of the eclipse degree has to be to any particular planet or angle, but I'm just throwing this out. I've said before, I'm not a predictive astrologer. I'm just saying what I see. I'm not saying what's going to happen because of it. That remains to be seen. But that Sun and that Venus also square his Chiron, which is at 28 Leo 52, excuse me, and which conjoins his North Node at the 2942 in his ninth house, which is Jupiter's domain, right? So the 12th house is often known in traditional astrology as the house of hidden enemies. We know that he's got a Mars square Pluto in his chart, and that this is a man who has endured Sun, Venus, square Chiron, and the nodes, has endured a lot of woundedness in this lifetime, from the loss of his wife, first wife, and baby daughter, and the long recovery of his children based on that accident, which occurred actually around his first Saturn return, when he first got elected to the Senate. It's kind of interesting, right? Anyway, so I just want to point that out. So we take a look at whether that father figure, the theme around who's ailing or ill, may manifest at this or after this, eclipse. Just file it away in the back of your head. Not saying anything, not saying it's going to happen, not saying he's going to die, not saying he's going to get sick, but just keep it in the back of your mind. So the other thing is that the Taurus new moon solar eclipse is actually, which isn't going to culminate, right, the energy until January 10th or thereabouts in 2023, that will happen after the midterm elections. And also just as Mercury is retrograding in Capricorn for the first time fully through an earth element, and 10 days before they seat a new Congress. For the rest of us, however, well, this is a period now where we can really go deep, especially during this and the following Mercury retrograde periods, about what's of greatest value to us. Can we live without certain things as long as we have love? Can we accept some limitations as long as we have autonomy over our own bodies? And when I say limitations, I mean limitations of things that are necessary to our survival: food, clothing, shelter, gas and oil to heat our homes and keep us from freezing to death, that kind of stuff. Can we afford to let go of some of our previous, the one with the most toys wins type of philosophies, and settle for enough, as long as that enough is enough to both sustain us and make us feel reasonably secure? I think if we think of our society in general, perhaps even having, just in terms of having a home that keeps us safe from outside elements is enough. Just think of the 10 million plus Ukrainian refugees right now who have been ousted from their homes or who have no homes to return to. And you'll understand what I mean about changing our value system. Now, this upcoming Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, which will and is already being felt on a more lunar, internal, emotionally intuitive level, occurs at 2518 Scorpio. So I pointed out the 27, 28 degrees, 29 degrees in Joe Biden's charts. And since the transiting Scorpio South Node and Taurus North Node nodal axis hit that degree already, and that was circa March 3rd of 2022, that was when this particular eclipse's theme really began to emerge into consciousness. And that means that this has been rolling around in people's guts and psyches for a long while. A couple of months, right? I'd say probably since the Supreme Court heard its oral arguments on the Mississippi case that limits legal abortion up to only 15 weeks of pregnancy. And those arguments were heard on December 1st of 2021, or last year. And that's in contrast to Roe versus Wade's legal precedent set by the higher court or the 1973 decision that established a constitutional right to abortion and prohibited states from banning the procedure before fetal viability, or around 23 weeks. So again, I'm not looking to argue with those who favor banning abortion either more severely or entirely. Rather, I'm here to focus on the astrology and the fact that the energies of this particular upcoming lunar eclipse probably began, at least according to Ronnie Dreyer's theory, around early March. And they will be culminating in a few days at this lunation. Now, that's a much shorter period, right? And the fact that this lunation occurs several days after Jupiter, the planet of higher consciousness, attempting to lead us to a more spiritual contemplation of our lives here on terra firma and our, natural rights, entered Aries the warrior on May 10th. And it tells us this fight began earlier this year, and those who believe that the right to privacy and autonomy over one's body lie in the U.S. Constitution because this document enshrines the right to life, liberty, and happiness for all and not just a very few. Now, the dichotomy at the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse too can be viewed through the Scorpio moon's proximity to the Scorpio south node, which normally would speak of releasing our attachment to power at all costs, especially since Saturn is still squaring the nodal axis and is squared by both the Scorpio moon and the Taurus sun at this lunation. Now, I've already discussed how the Saturn in Aquarius square to the nodes has been in play for a while and will continue to do so through his retrograde period, which starts June 3rd and ends October 22nd. And combined with the fact that Saturn will move into a tighter orb of repeating his fixed square to Uranus and Taurus, and that will occur from September through November, we can see why there's another clash coming, like the one in 2021, when these two squared exact 3 times that year, in February, June, and again in late December, prompting a great deal of social unrest. And of course, social unrest has been the name of the game, both in the U.S. and abroad, since Saturn entered Aquarius in March of 2020, and the world experienced the backlash against the murder of George Floyd by police officer Derek Chauvin, igniting street protests, both domestically and again abroad. Street protests that we now know the president at the time wanted the army to quell by shooting at protesters. Now, I'd like to quickly just read something that, because I only have a few minutes left. So I want to say that I pulled this from the op-ed in the New York Times, a piece by Maureen Dowd. And I'll read it quickly. And then one more quote from Lawrence Tribe, one of the legal scholars who teaches, I don't know if he still does, but he taught at Harvard. So Maureen Dowd says the founding fathers would be less surprised that there's a popular musical about Alexander Hamilton than they would be that in an age of space travel, the internet, Netflix, and in vitro fertilization, the majority of the court is relying on a literal interpretation, again, Saturn, right, of a document conceived in the agrarian 1780s. They would be devastated that the court is just another hack institution with partisan leaks. Alito helped open the door to dark money and helped gut the Voting Rights Act, but he wants to ban abortion largely because he says the Constitution doesn't expressly allow it. Tradition. That's so fatuous. The Constitution doesn't mention an awful lot of things that the court involves itself with. But while it expressly prohibits state-sanctioned religion, this court seems ready to let some rebel public school football coach convene a prayer sessions after games. These rogue justices are always ready to twist the Constitution to their purposes. We see another Jupiter and Aries theme here. They are strict constructionists, all right, strictly interested in constructing a society that comports with their rigid, religiously driven worldview. It's outrageous that 5 unelected, unaccountable, and relatively unknown political operatives masquerading as impartial justice can so profoundly alter our lives. And then I want to end with the fact that legal scholar Lawrence Tribe said on March 8th. No, May. It's May, SHERI. Okay, sorry. And here I quote, "You can't take away a right that people have built their lives around for the past 50 years. Alito says that women don't need this right because they've risen into positions of proximate equality backed up by the court. To roll that back is to go back to the dark ages, and we really shouldn't let that happen." As to his thoughts, he said, on Clarence Thomas's comments about the court not being bullied, quote, "To talk about the court not being bullied as it's bullying women into losing their right to privacy is really an outrageous comment for him to be making. The discussion of freedom is not important for the 9 justices who have more power than the founding fathers ever intended." And that's the end of his quote. And then I paraphrase, "It's the freedom of the average citizen that's most important." Anyway, these are the themes that we're pondering. And again, I had mentioned in my write-up to this that we also have Mars joining Neptune next week on the 17th, and the Sun trining Pluto. So I think Mars-Neptune is a very big indication, again, that can pull us back to wishful thinking. Mars and Neptune are an interesting combination because, again, Neptune dissolves some of Mars' ambition, I think, and it possibly waters it down, but it also adds in that element of fantasy or wishful thinking. This is the Susan Collins kind of thinking. Oh, well, the Women's Equality Act didn't include protections for Catholic hospitals against being mandated to perform abortions. Therefore, I can't vote for it. And that they may take some of us off in a different direction, as opposed to keeping our eyes focused on the ball, All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on May 19th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go